The 30th annual Alaska Native Art Auction, celebrating Indigenous artists and voices, takes place Saturday, March 21st at the Hotel Captain Cook in Anchorage. Information available at knba.org. The Alaska Native Art Auction Gala is March 21st, 2026 in Anchorage, Alaska. Donate artwork by February 27th, 2026 and be eligible to win $500. Help sustain Indigenous-led media, including National Native News. Donor forms and details are found at knba.org.
Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. New Mexico is launching an investigation into the history and scope of forced sterilizations of Native women. It's the first state to look into a dark and little-known chapter of a federal policy carried out at Indian Health Service facilities. A federal government report counts more than 3,400 Native women who were sterilized over 4 years in the 1970s in just 4 cities. Native women's advocates hope New Mexico's investigation will shed more light on the issue and reveal a clear path to reconciliation and healing. We're back after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Antonia Gonzalez. A new report shows access to nearby nature in the U.S. is not equal, and the gap is closely tied to race and income. Researchers say Indigenous communities are among those most affected. The Mountain West News Bureau's Caleb Radel has more.
Communities of color are 3 times more likely than white communities to live in places with severe nature loss. Fewer parks, fewer trees, more pollution. That's thanks in part to resource extraction and the rapid development of natural spaces. Researchers say that's significant for tribal areas, where land is closely tied to cultural traditions and food systems. Raina Payan with Justice Outside, which co-produced the report, says losing nearby nature isn't just about scenery.
Nature deprivation isn't just about the aesthetics of who has access to big nature. It's also about who has access to clean air and clean water.
The report also highlights Indigenous-led solutions. On the Navajo Nation, local groups are restoring native grasslands and wildlife habitat. In Alaska, Native organizations are protecting salmon streams and coastal ecosystems that support subsistence. Researchers say efforts grounded in Indigenous stewardship could help close what they call the nation's growing nature gap. For National Native News, I'm Caleb Radel.
Reliable high-speed internet is still out of reach for many tribal communities. A new report highlights ongoing barriers to broadband access in Indian country. Daniel Spalding reports.
The report from the Urban Institute says many Indigenous communities lack reliable high-speed internet, especially in rural areas. Recent federal investments have helped expand broadband in some tribal communities, but gaps remain. Tommy Reininger is a co-author of the report.
In certain parts of the country, especially in Indian country and a lot of rural communities, folks have a lot less access to high-speed broadband than other parts of the U.S.
The Urban Institute's Gabe Samuel says geography is one of the biggest challenges.
Because of, the historic way where a lot of tribes were relocated, they're often, located in maybe more remote rural areas that are physically harder to access. It's just kind of compounds the challenge to accessing.
Reininger and Samuels both say allowing tribes to manage their own broadband infrastructure will be key to improving access. I'm Daniel Spalding.
American bison are a symbol of the West that might have vanished from the landscape entirely if not for conservation efforts. As KJZZ's Gabriel Pietrozio reports, the city of Denver donates bison from a long-established herd to tribes and nonprofits each year.
Snow powdered the 34 bison inside a pen while tribes blessed them. 11 went to the Navajo Nation. The rest were sent to the Northern Cheyenne Tribe, a Lakota nonprofit, Buffalo First in South Dakota, and the Denver-based Tall Bull Memorial Council. This keystone species once roamed the Great Plains, but faced the brink of extinction. In 1908, the Denver Zoo had only 18 animals left in captivity, but they would help form a herd near Golden, Colorado. The city has transferred more than 170 buffalo into tribal hands. For National Native News, I'm Gabriel Pietrozio.
In New York State, more than 900 acres of land is returning to Indigenous care. The Six Nations Iroquois Cultural Center, Paul Smith College, the Nature Conservancy, and the Adirondack Land Trust joined in the Land Back Partnership. The Nature Conservancy purchased 600 acres of land for $1.1 million from the college and transferred ownership to the Cultural Center. The Cultural Center will privately own and steward the land. The Land Trust has already transferred 300 acres of adjoining land to the Cultural Center. I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support by the Gathering of Nations Powwow. The last dance is this April 24th and 25th at Expo, New Mexico. Reservations open now for RV and camper camping on the powwow grounds at Expo, New Mexico. Tickets at gatheringofnations.com and at the gates.
Eighth Generation is a Seattle-based lifestyle brand owned by the Snoqualmie tribe, offering authentic native-designed blankets, jewelry, and gifts. More at Reservation Economic Summit booths 805 and 21 and at 8thgeneration.com, who support this show.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. There is a painful nationwide chapter of history that continues to echo through Native communities that has mainly been whispered in private conversations. For decades, women entering Indian Health Service clinics for routine care left unable to ever bear children again. Accurate numbers are hard to come by, but researchers estimate up to half of all Native women were sterilized in the 1970s. Many of them were coerced, deceived, or had no say in the procedure that would change their lives forever. But now, the conversation is shifting. The state of New Mexico is launching a comprehensive investigation into the practice of forced sterilization. By establishing a truth and reconciliation framework, the state aims to identify survivors, gather testimony, and bring the full scope of a federal policy that targeted Native families into view. There are efforts in other states as well. Please join our conversation today. The number is 1-800-996-2848. That is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Let's now meet today's guests. Joining us in the Albuquerque studio is Elena Giacchi. She is a historical trauma trainer and an anti-sexual violence advocate. She is Diné. Elena, hello, and welcome back to Native America Calling.
Thank you so much.
Also joining us in the Albuquerque studio, we have Josette Monette. She is the Cabinet Secretary for the State of New Mexico Indian Affairs Department, and she is a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians. Josette, good morning to you and welcome. Thanks for coming on the show.
Good morning. Thanks for having us today.
Joining us from Smith Lake, New Mexico, on the line, we have Jean Whitehorse. She is an advocate and longtime member of the American Indian Movement. She is Navajo. Jean, good morning to you. Welcome to Native America Calling.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. And joining us from Shelburne, Vermont, we have Don Stevens. He is the chief of the Nulhagen Band of the Coosac Abenaki Nation. Chief Stevens, you've been on the show before. Welcome back.
Quite in a while. Thank you. And I appreciate you inviting me.
I appreciate all of you taking the time to educate our listeners today. And Elena, I want to begin with you. What first prompted New Mexico to take up the issue of forced sterilization of Native women?
Well, I think it began a number of years ago. I do presentations, and there was one slide, just one slide, that was dedicated to the forced sterilization of our Indigenous women. And I was surprised and amazed about how few people understood that this had gone on, much less our own community, who rarely spoke about it in public. And so I joined forces with Keely Badger, who did her dissertation on forced sterilization of Indigenous women. And together we sat there one day and said, let's try to change something. And we ended up, because we know some really powerful amazing senators, both Senator Pinto and Senator Lopez. Both were willing to hear what we had wanting to do for the future of our communities as well as New Mexico. And they listened and they said, I think we can do this. And with that, just a little spurring on, we ended up writing a legislative memorial. And hopefully next year we will do a bill that will encapsulate more of the commission and how we would like to operate it. And so, you know what they say about powerful stories, and we're just one of those stories, but it's very much how our community works through things, works through problems, works through issues, and we ended up getting such broad community support for this that it made it just really have strength as it went through the Senate.
Mm-hmm. Now, Elena, this is going back decades. Are you coming into challenges with regard to getting data or accurate information about what exactly happened to these Native women in New Mexico?
Well, one of the things that my very first person that came to me was almost 30 years ago. And one of the things she said was, I think something happened down there and I can't have children anymore. And I don't know why. I started looking into the data, and there was very little data at all, with the exception of what's called the Government Accounting Office, who actually looked into some of this. And most of the information that we have currently has come from that report. When Keely Badger started looking into it for her dissertation, she found that it was a pretty big wall to go through to get information from IHS, the records, and any other components of that. So data has been thin at best and almost non-existent at worst. And so that is one of the tasks that we're tasked with, is to start taking a look at how we can get better data. And one of those is when you have the state of New Mexico and the, state senators and the force of New Mexico asking the questions might, and we're hoping, will be a little bit different on how we can get better and more data.
Mm-hmm. Elena, what do we know about how Indian Health Service hospitals were being run at this time, and how specifically were these Native women targeted for sterilization?
Well, as I'm sure you understand, often, as our audience also understands, is the colonization that occurred hundreds of years ago still rests on the shoulders and the community of the damage that has been done and perpetrated against us. And so when we start taking a look at all of those levels, the levels of rape and how high our rape rates are for our indigenous women, but let's not forget our indigenous grandpas that have, had that happen in a boarding school era. And so we have all of those different components of saying, how do we go about doing this, and where do we start, and what do we do? And a lot of it is just laying the groundwork that says, let's first develop community awareness. Let's first try to let people know that it's okay to talk about this in our community and that you won't be blamed, and trying to get that information out there is probably going to be one of the biggest and key. Most things is creating awareness and no shame to being able to talk about it.
Okay. Where I find this so startling is I have a lot of family who've worked in healthcare over the years, and going back to the 1970s, it wasn't that long ago. There were Native American administrators in Indian Health Service at that time. There were nurses and doctors working in some facilities. I'm not saying that they were necessarily involved, but there was Native presence in some of these hospitals, more so than there had been maybe in the 1930s or the 40s or the 50s. So again, Elena, it just really, really perplexes me. What do you ultimately hope this investigation will uncover?
I mean, it is a little perplexing. And yet, when you start taking a look at the history and the colonization and how we have been treated and how our land was taken, unfortunately, it kind of lays the landwork for doing these types of things where people feel that they can do whatever to our community and get away with it. Mm-hmm. And I think IHS at the time, when we take a look at how some of this could even occur, and, I think the biggest piece here is when we sit there and think that if people are 15 years old, in your lifetimes, a lot of this happened and occurred. If you're 30 years old, this occurred in your lifetime. So when we look at things like incredibly bad permission forms, so they might be in English, and that person does not speak English but has an indigenous language. The fact that most of these forms were never explained. The fact that some of the forms that we looked at, we found pieces missing in that. But nowhere did we ever find that it said, okay, this is what's going to happen to you. And if it was buried in all sorts of other medical information. So it was really deceiving on some of the things that were occurring to our women as they were getting other procedures done, because very few of them knew that this was happening to them.
All right, we have Elena Giacchi kicking off our conversation here today. She is in the Albuquerque studio, along with Josette Monette, who is Cabinet Secretary for the State of New Mexico Indian Affairs Department. We're going to take a short break. We're going to come back. We'll continue this conversation. We'll bring Josette in, and we'll get a take in terms of what the role of the Indian Affairs Department will be in this pending investigation. And we've got the phone lines open for any listeners right now who would like to join this conversation, or if you have any thoughts, any insights with regard to forced sterilization and how this took place in various Indian Health Service facilities decades ago, but in some ways maybe not that long ago. There are still plenty of folks alive today who have memories of this time, who might have been victims during this time, or know family members or others in their community that might have had their lives dramatically impacted by these actions by hospitals that were serving Native American people. So we'd like to hear from listeners, definitely. Phone lines are open. Just pick up your phone and call us at 1-800-996-2848. That number again, 1-800-996-2848, or just 1-800-99-NATIVE. That'll work as well. And, of course, you can always go to our website, nativeamericacalling.com. You can comment there. Or Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky Threads. We've got social media going on as well. Stay with us. We'll be right back. The John Ford movie The Searchers is often viewed as a cinematic masterpiece by modern filmmakers, but Native audiences recoil at problematic stereotypes and appropriation in the movie that was a common problem in the Western movie genre at the time. We'll reassess The Searchers as the movie marks its 70th anniversary. That's on the next Native America Calling.
Join us for the 30th Annual Alaska Native Art Auction, presented by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation on Saturday, March 21st at the Hotel Captain Cook in Anchorage. Enjoy an evening featuring a hosted dinner, an indigenous fashion show, and live music, bringing community members and leaders together to elevate Native artists and voices. Get your tickets or become a sponsor today at knba.org. That's knba.org.
Thank you for listening to Native America Calling today. We are talking about the history of forced or coerced sterilizations of Native women. Do any women in your family or community have ties to this injustice? Or maybe there is a lasting distrust in basic health care because of this history in your community, and it needs to be addressed. Let us know. The number is 1-800-996-2848. That is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. We have Elena Giacchi in the studio today. She's a historical trauma trainer and an anti-sexual violence advocate. And also Josette Monette is in the studio, Cabinet Secretary for the State of New Mexico Indian Affairs Department. And Josette, we heard Elena talk earlier about this horrible, horrible period of history that impacted so many Native women in New Mexico and other parts of Indian country. Can you tell us what will be the role of the New Mexico Indian Affairs Department in this upcoming investigation?
Yeah, so the memorial requests that the Indian Affairs Department really help with setting up some of the foundational work in terms of identifying some of the historical cases, gathering some survivor testimony, looking at community impact. I think also looking at trying to see if we can access some of the information that maybe has been difficult to access in the past. I do think that will be one of the areas where, it'll be a little difficult to potentially get some information. But I think that's one area that the Indian Affairs Department, along with, the group that we established to help us with meeting some of the goals of the memorial will come into play. We'll be looking at, of course, as time goes on, what are some of the policy type issues that we can look into, safeguards and education. The memorial does ask that IAD, the department, along with the Commission on the Status of Women, look into what type of education can we do, what kind of justice and reproductive sovereignty are we looking at, and what kind of curriculum can we put out to the community so that people are aware of these types of incidents that have happened and that we can do better for our people moving forward, looking at healing and accountability and what we can do.
Josette, how does the fact that there aren't any reliable studies or investigations into this issue, how is that going to impact the healing and health programming that these women need?
I think it puts the state of New Mexico in a unique position to be able to say, okay, let us see what we can do. I think that's where some of this is going to become really foundational in terms of how we collect data, and we really listen to some of the family members or people who may have had personal lived experience and see, listening to them and taking time to ensure that we're doing a thorough and effective and responsive job at moving forward. I think this is going to take quite a bit of time, quite honestly. It's important to note that, the memorial does say that we have until December of 2027. And so the department will be working to ensure that we are doing a thorough, comprehensive job. And I think some of it is going to be learned, but I think that it's going to hopefully set a groundwork for what can be done and replicated throughout the country in terms of how can you start accessing this data, how can you start gathering people's stories, and how do we start looking at how we can build that educational curriculum to look at what were the impacts, what happened, and how do we move on and move forward in a good way.
I want to provide a disclaimer to our listeners. Our producers did reach out to the Indian Health Service, but they declined to be part of today's show. Josette, the Indian Health Service has been mostly quiet on this issue. Do you foresee any challenges now in getting the information that is necessary from the government to proceed with this investigation?
Well, I can say that I'm an attorney. And so from an attorney perspective, I always look at that perspective. And I think there might be some issues, in terms of what they can release. And but of course, we had a conversation, Elena and I chatted yesterday too about, and she was mentioning it earlier, the conversation about how the records were kept, even if we do get records, and what was put into the records of what was happening to these women, and whether or not it's a true representation of what actually happened. And so I think that's going to become, so I do think that this becomes an area where at least for the Indian Affairs Department, where we have to really look at getting some of those stories from people who believe that they experienced it or know that they experienced it, so that we can use those stories to kind of go from there and see how we can build from that point forward.
All right. Thank you, Josette. Let's add another perspective to this conversation now. And to do that, we have Jean Whitehorse, who speaks with us on the phone from Smith Lake, New Mexico. She's an advocate and a longtime member of the American Indian Movement. And Jean, you testified at the United Nations and also during a recent New Mexico legislative hearing. Why is it important for you to share your story now with people?
Thank you very much for the time, and I'd like to share my story just to let other women out there know that they weren't the only one. That's what, I said at the legislative session. And besides being sterilized, I am a survivor of the government boarding school. Everybody hears about that. I attended the boarding school from age 5. And I also was sent on that government relocation program to Oakland, California in 1969. That was the time when all these civil rights movement was going on. So that's where I learned, about what Native American, being, Native American, and why we were treated in these certain ways, without our consent. Mm-hmm. And then in 1972, when I was about 22, I became a victim of Native sterilization. So I've been through the government policy. I'm a survivor. I'm resilient. And, that's what keeps me going. But I have one daughter. As I said, in 1972, I actually went to Crown Point Indian Health Service, because I had pain on my right side. I drove myself because I was at home by myself. And when I got to Crown Point, I was transported to Gallup by ambulance. And when I got to Gallup, they examined me and they told me, I had appendix infection. And before they could, do anything, for me, that I had to sign some papers. But I was in pain. I didn't even get to see the papers. They were just laying out on those trays that they usually have your meal on. And the nurse actually just put the pin in my hand, sign here, so we can, perform the procedure. So that's what I did. I didn't know. And without my consent, without being, told about what else they were going to do, they just did it when I was, sedated. I didn't know what they did to me. So that was, so they, they say tubal ligation. So that's what they did to me. But when I came out of that surgery, my scar should be on the right side, of my, lower part. But my scar is below the belly, all the way down. That's the only proof that I carry. I never had children anymore. When my daughter was 2, I'm sorry. When my daughter was 2, almost 2, I wanted more children. I was unable to conceive. That's when the doctor said, you were referred to Gallup. Let me ask for your records. So I got another appointment. When I went back to my appointment, he explained to me, he said, did you know that you were sterilized? I said, no. What do you mean by that? And he told me that I had a tubal ligation, meaning I will never have no more children. It's still hard to talk about it.
Jean, I just applaud your bravery and your strength to come on the show today and share this story, share this. It's just so troubling to hear. I'm just struggling even now, just kind of trying to fathom everything that occurred to you. The Indian Health Service, have they ever provided you with any sort of a response, any sort of reasoning or justification for what happened?
No, I never got any answer why they did that to me. To this day, I don't have any answers. But when that time the doctor explained to me what they did, he told me, besides getting my appendix out, they did this and that to you. Not only did they do surgery, when I came out, there was another birth control that they had. They call it IUD. I don't remember the term for that. So they put that in me again, IUD to prevent, pregnancy, but I was already sterilized. That I still know, and I remember when he explained that to me. So from there, I didn't go back for any other checkup or anything, just for other, health issues. So, like I said, I only have one daughter now, and it's very hard. At my age now, when I need something done, when I need to go somewhere, I ask my daughter. Of course, she works. Everybody has to work, and she lives in Albuquerque. And so she can't help me. So then I tell her, I wish I had more children so one of them would help me out with a lot of stuff now that I need to get done. So, I just drive myself to my appointment wherever I need to go. I'm still able to drive. I'm 77 years old. I can say that on the radio because it's how old I am now. Mm-hmm. So it's very hard to even, talk about it. For the longest time, I just kept it a secret. Even my paternal grandma that lived to be 110 asked me at one time. I visit her up in the Barno Pass in the mountains. She said, why do you only have one daughter? Your brothers and sisters have 4 or 5 children. I never told her. I never told my mother or father. That was how, I kept it a secret from my own family. I never told my daughter until she was about over 30 years old. She asked me, why don't I have brothers and sisters? Mm-hmm. How do you tell somebody when they're not even 13 yet? So that's how it's been. But when my grandmother asked me that, she told me our Navajo name, or her Navajo name, is Baaschinisane. In English, that's many children. That even made it worse, to know that I had a name that I couldn't even live up to. So Jean, I've been carrying this with me all these years. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking right now, our show, we broadcast all across Indian country, lots of different stations, and there's probably somebody, or there could be right now, someone listening, another woman listening to the show, and this might have happened to her too. And maybe she's never shared her story, or maybe she's never spoken about it with other family members. What's your message to that woman who might be listening right now?
Just like I was saying, I didn't start sharing my story until 2010. I went back to one of the West conference in San Francisco, and there were other Native people talking about what they've been through, mostly boarding school and relocation. That's when I thought, I need to tell my story because nobody knows about this. So from there on, I started sharing my story. Like I said, I'm not the only one that this happened to. There are other women out there that are still, have that secret. Mm-hmm. Some of these women never had children, and they took that secret with them to their grave. So that, I just wanted to say that too.
Okay. All right, Jean, thank you. Josette, I want to bring you back into the conversation, and again, going back to this investigation, and I'm just sitting here listening to Jean and hearing her voice and the tone and the pain that she has gone through. How do you see this investigation ultimately becoming a positive for Native women everywhere? And ultimately, what I hear here is that healing is desperately needed. How does that go forward, Josette?
First, thank you, Jane, for sharing your story. It's a very powerful story. I think hearing those types of stories, again, I think are going to be really helpful for us. I think we also want to give space to people to share those stories. We're hoping that we can build some different avenues where people can feel safe and comfortable to be able to share those stories with us. And whether or not all of the stories get shared publicly or not, those will be discussions, I'm sure, throughout time. But I think getting kind of the groundwork of those stories and hearing some of these, women's voices, just like Jean's, who are able to tell us about what they've experienced or what they've been hiding. And really, again, in hopes of ensuring that we can help prevent this from happening to Native women, but to really all women in the future, and ensuring that women have the ability to make decisions for their bodies in ways that that they feel are best for their bodies. And so helping with that.
So, Josette, are you saying that there's possibly still a risk that forced sterilizations could be occurring or could potentially occur for Native women?
I honestly don't know. I can't say that, but I can say that, there's always the old adage about history repeating itself. And so I think ensuring that we're just making sure that people have the opportunity to be heard if they want to be heard, and that they can share their stories. And again, that people are aware, the country, the world are aware that these things happened. It is a part of history, and really just looking for what we can do better in the future.
All right. Thanks, Josette. We're going to take another break. We'll come back and we'll continue the show. And the phone lines are still open for any listeners right now who would like to join this conversation. Let us know your thoughts, what you're feeling right now. This is a tough show, so I just want to make sure folks are being mindful of that and thinking of your own mental health as well as we continue this conversation. So stay with us, and if you'd like to call in, the number is 1-800-996-2848.
Tribal Development Partners, supporting tribal sovereignty through 105L leasing and essential infrastructure development. Tribal Development Partners will attend RES 2026 in booth 303 and are proud to support this show.
Need an actionable plan to achieve your goals? Kaufman & Associates strengthens Native organizations through culturally grounded strategic planning. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce, and we are talking about new efforts to address a lasting legacy of forced and coerced sterilization of Native women. If you have questions or comments about this little-known era of Native history, give us a call. We're at 1-800-996-2848. Now, we have been focused on New Mexico for the whole show up to this point, but we need to understand that this issue is much bigger than just New Mexico and the Southwest. And to broaden this discussion, let's now introduce Chief Don Stevens of the Nullhagen Band of the Coosac Abenaki Nation. He is in Shelburne, Vermont. And Chief Stevens, Vermont started work to address forced sterilization of women back in 2023. What prompted that action?
Well, thank you for covering this very important topic. But actually, it started much earlier than that. I started working on this issue with legislators back in 2010. We put in a bill, and of course, it never came out of committee because the state was afraid that if they admitted to wrongdoing, that there'd be some sort of consequences to to acknowledging the fact that they did something wrong. And then after that was shot down, I started working heavily with the actual university and medical center who actually carried out the actual eugenics survey, as they called it, which is tracking people who they felt were unworthy of breeding or defective. And so I got them to do the apology. The president, I worked with the president and got them to do the apology back in 2019. And that kind of put the state in a unique position, because the people who actually carried out the survey under the 1931 Sterilization Act, when they apologized, the state was kind of, I don't want to say backed into a corner, but they pretty much came through and apologized in 2021, and that was passed. The apology, a joint resolution for an apology, was passed.
Okay.
And so it started much earlier. The first instances that we know were early 1900s when they started sterilizing our people. We're in a state that's 95% white European, so we don't have reservations. So they would track us through local hospitals and communities, and I can explain that after if you need.
Well, you referenced the 1931 Sterilization Act. Provide a little bit more insight for our listeners.
Yeah, basically there was a national movement in the 20s across the country to breed better hereditary populations. And one of the professors here, Henry Perkins, worked for the University of Vermont College, but was part of the medical center zoology program. And he got really interested in breeding better Vermonters, worked with the American Breeding Society or Association to say, how do we create better humans and weed out anything that might affect good Yankee stock. So he started this program of looking into it on the national level, and then went to the legislative body and said, we really need to do something about defective people, or those we don't want breeding that causes defects, because he was saying that it puts strain on the institutions, the poor farms, the social welfare societies, and all of these support services, and this is how you could, reduce that demand or need or budget when it comes to having to take care of these people. Okay. And that's what the catalyst was of passing this law in Vermont, which is a little scary. It's still on the books, but you have to go through a superior court now to be sterilized, instead of before a doctor could make that decision. So okay. It's still a little unnerving. And my grandmother was in the eugenics survey. She had to change her name several times, move from place to place, and every time they did, they tracked people. And there's some scary stuff here in Vermont where that happened. And there was even some correspondence from Germany here, because obviously Hitler was very interested on how they tracked and found people. He just took it to the extreme. And, but he was looking at what they were doing in the United States and how they were tracking people and how they were trying to find people as they moved around. It's a little nerve-wracking.
What did your grandmother say, or what did she share about this survey? Did she provide any details?
She didn't really provide any details. She was listed as a cripple, and she had to actually leave the state and because she was being tracked. And she didn't really want to do anything with native culture in Vermont, because nobody wants to raise their hand when you're running from trying to be sterilized. You don't want to raise your hand saying, hey, I'm over here, please come get me. Mm-hmm. So it really devastated the people in Vermont on the cultural aspect, because we don't have a reservation. A lot of people were family bands and they moved from place to place. We were known as the Indian Gypsies because we would move from our winter grounds to summer grounds. And obviously you'd end up either asking for assistance, or you get in trouble with the law, or somebody thinks you're a vagrant or something. And then that triggered the investigations of what's going on with your family. And then once they got a hold of your name, then you're in trouble. My family was one of the largest tracked in Vermont. We had 436 of my family members listed in the the eugenics survey, which is tracking people for sterilization or trying to find out who these people were. So,
Chief Stevens, so you mentioned an apology issued by the state of Vermont back in 2021. How much weight does that action carry? What's been the response with regard to that survey? Is it enough? What other actions would you like to see take place now?
Well, for me, it's a start. In order to fix something, you have to acknowledge that it actually happened. So I think getting them to apologize and promise that they would never create genocide or ethnocide on our people ever again is a step in the right direction, even though there's still aspects in Vermont that are still harmful to our people. We're still attacked, on a daily basis for who we are as a people. But I'm saying it's a start, so they can acknowledge the fact that it happened. Then there's a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was created out of the apology, which is kind of what your other guests were talking about, where they were tasked to document stories, both either public if you wanted it shared or anonymously, to record the stories of what happened, how it affected the families, how else, what actually went on and what areas in state government has affected people. Because we had a lot of the institutions that were associated with the state that actually were involved in all of this. And it's unfortunate with the records, too. They had to pass the law to get this done because with probably same with Indian Health Services, personal health information is protected, and a lot of times they're sealed, and they won't let anybody see them, or that's not common knowledge because you're dealing with individual people. So part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was giving them permission to look into those files and document what happened, but not disclose unless the recipient or the individual agreed to have it public knowledge. So they have access to the records that we wouldn't as normal population or normal families. So there's a whole process that's starting to wrap up, and they're recommending to the legislative body, I think next year, with a final report of what should happen, what they found and that kind of stuff, to see where does the state go from there, because an apology is just an apology. It's just words unless they back it up. Mm-hmm. But outside of that Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I've worked with the legislators after the apology to get access to the state lands so our people can gather food like we did traditionally, gather materials for medicines and for artistry, and adding our language to the state park signs and doing other things that really doesn't cost them a lot of money, but that will help promote our culture and our language, so that way we can move forward in a partnership instead of having us always worrying about whether or not we're going to have a problem. But there's still a lot of people here that are afraid of medical institutions, research, schools, and there's a lot of people still afraid of what could happen, because my grandmother died in 94. I mean, I knew my grandmother, right? It's still pretty fresh in our mind. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of fear here.
Sure. Right. Thank you, Chief Stevens. We're going to go to the phones now. We've got a listener who's called in. This is Deirdre, and she's listening to the show online. Hello, Deirdre. You're on the line.
Hey, thank you so much for taking my call. As a woman, as a mother, as an Ojibwe defendant, and as a survivor too of violence, domestic violence, which was also a threat to my fertility and survival of my babies, I really feel for those who've spoken out, like Jean and everyone else. And wow, I mean, it's really horrendous. It's brutal. It was cruel. And now I just want to alert people. Like Josette said, sometimes history repeats itself. It tends to repeat itself. Okay, well, there is a certain mass sterilization and infertility causing that is going on, and I think it's not being spoken about on the general media. We're not being warned about it, but it's definitely happening, and it's actually through chemicals that we're absorbing in the body that come from daily use products. So I think this is something that people should know. And although I know that there's too many people in the world right now, and a lot of people think human population should drop, but I think it's because the way that we've been brutally exploiting Mother Earth and pouring chemical poisons into the natural world, of course, the Earth can no longer just keep supporting us in huge numbers, but that's also as a result of us not loving her, right? So, I mean, I would really like to see all the Native Americans thrive. And in order to maintain high fertility and healthy fertility and to have children, we're going to be capable, boys and girls, of having children and having healthy children. It's very important to understand about hormone disruptors, endocrine disruptors, and to realize that almost every day these are being used in the household. They're being used in substances to clean the house, to clean our clothes, to wash our dishes. And more than what we eat, we have to look at what we're breathing in and what we put on our skin, and also what we eat, what it's wrapped in, what kind of plastics it's wrapped in. Because these chemicals, mostly man-made, they act like estrogen in the body. A lot of them have the effect of estrogen, the hormone estrogen in the body. And in tiny amounts, this has a huge impact. Now, there's books to read, like Theo Colborn's book from years back. Our Stolen Future. There's also Anne Steinman, Dr. Anne Steinman, and her massive publications more recently.
Okay, Deirdre calling in, a listener online. Lots to weigh in on today's show. I want to go back to Elena Giacchi as we begin to wind down here. We've got a couple of minutes left. And Elena, I want to go back to the investigation, the pending investigation here in New Mexico. And I'm curious to know what's been the response so far. How supportive are lawmakers? Are you getting any pushback from any lawmakers? What are the next steps here?
Well, we have a number of them, and one of them is to collect the testimonies and then document any kind of medical records, any archives that we can find, and then investigate and try to investigate the scale of what we're looking at, and then trying to find steps forward. How do we heal? And when we're investigating, I think, unfortunately, our community has been the recipient of really bad research done in really disrespectful ways. And so one of the tasks that is required as part of this memorial is that it's done with being trauma-informed and culturally appropriate. And so those are some of our tasks. Do I think we have a huge task ahead of us? Yes. We have not had hardly any pushback from community. And when the SM-14 was passed in the Senate, it was passed by a unanimous vote. And so that is kind of the types of things that we have seen so far. When people find out about it, when the community becomes aware of it, we have seen really great support, and really great support through the nation organizations, and really great support from other community organizations. So I have to say, I'm really proud of the state of New Mexico for being part of this. And as Chief Stevens knows how difficult this is, we're just taking it one step at a time, and we're looking very forward to the future of trying to bring this awareness.
All right. With that, we're going to have to wrap up the show. We are out of time, but I do want to thank our four guests who joined the conversation today: Elena Giacchi, Josette Monette, Jean Whitehorse, and also Chief Don Stevens. And as always, just because we're going to have to end the show doesn't mean the dialogue has to stop as well. So feel free to visit our Facebook page, our Instagram, also Blue Sky or Threads, or just go to our website, nativeamericacalling.com. Share, post, like, comment. Tell us your thoughts on today's show, the issue we talked about with regard to forced or perhaps coerced sterilization of Native women. It's a tough topic. Some strong conversation here today on the show. I always like to hear from listeners. I'd like to get your feedback. What'd you think? And if there's other shows that you'd like to hear about, other topics, other issues, you're more than welcome to provide those suggestions to us as well here at Native America Calling. And with that, we will be back tomorrow for a conversation about the 70th anniversary of the film The Searchers. It's considered both a masterpiece and a problematic glorification of Native stereotypes. We'll assess its legacy tomorrow. Hope you'll tune in. I'm Sean Spruce.
Support by the Gathering of Nations Powwow. The last dance is this April 24th and 25th at Expo, New Mexico. Reservations open now for RV and camper camping on the powwow grounds at Expo, New Mexico. Tickets at gatheringofnations.com and at the gates.
Support from Davis Keelan Law Firm, a New Mexico firm standing with Native families suffering catastrophic loss. When tragedy strikes Indian country, we fight to restore stability, dignity, and justice. Bringing a voice to Native families and communities for 20 years. More information, daviskeelan.com.
Who protects Indian country? Amerind does. As the only 100% tribally owned insurance carrier, Amerind helps strengthen tribal communities by providing reliable insurance coverage and keeping dollars in Indian country. From property and liability to commercial auto and tribal workers' compensation, Amerind is here to protect what matters. Celebrating 40 years of serving Indian country. Learn more at amerind.com. That's AMERIND.com.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Quantic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
The 30th Annual Alaska Native Art Auction, celebrating Indigenous artists and voices, takes place Saturday, March 21st. Corporate sponsorship opportunities are available. Information at kmba.org.